I was sitting in a barber's chair on a Wednesday afternoon, 3:15, maybe 3:20, and the shop was almost empty. One guy by the window scrolling his phone, the TV on some daytime court show nobody was watching, and Marcus. Marcus has been cutting hair in that same chair for 14 years. He's not a philosopher. He's the kind of man who says exactly what he sees and never thinks twice about it because, to him, it's not a statement. It's just an observation. He was trimming the back of my neck when he said it. Casual. Almost between other thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" Not being rude, just curious. "Why do you always pay when you're out with people? Like, every single time you come in here after lunch with somebody, you mention you got the check. Every time. What's that about?" And I opened my mouth. The answer was loaded. I'd said it 100 times without thinking. I'm just generous, I guess. But the words didn't come out, because in that half-second between his question and my automatic reply, in that tiny gap where the answer should have fired, I heard something. Not a thought I chose to think. A playback. Instant. My mother's voice, clear as if she were standing behind the barber's chair. "People who let others pay for them don't have dignity. We always pay our way." I was 9 years old. We'd gone to dinner at a restaurant that, I now understand, was slightly above what my mother could comfortably afford. My uncle's family was there. At the end of the meal, my uncle suggested splitting the bill. My mother paid her half without a word. In the car, she didn't speak for 40 minutes. I sat in the back seat watching streetlights pass, feeling the weight of a silence I couldn't decode. When we got home, she stood at the kitchen counter, not looking at me, looking at the wall above the sink, and said at once, "Remember this, people who let others pay for them don't have dignity. We always pay our way." She said it once, I heard it once, and that sentence installed itself, not as advice I could evaluate, not as an opinion I could agree or disagree with, as firmware. Operating instructions that ran below conscious decision-making for 22 years. Every group dinner, every coffee I insisted on covering, every check I grabbed before anyone could reach for it, every, "Oh, I got this," that felt like generosity and was actually a child's operating instruction running in a 31-year-old's body, spending a 31-year-old's money to protect a mother's dignity from an evening 2 decades ago. This isn't a video about budgeting or investment strategies or saving hacks. It's about the sentences. The specific, inherited, unexamined sentences installed in your financial operating system before you were old enough to know they were sentences and not truth. Marcus asked a question I couldn't answer without hearing the voice underneath, and once I heard it, once I traced it back to a kitchen counter, a child, a sentence spoken once with enough emotional weight to embed permanently, I started listening for the other ones, the ones running my savings behavior, my debt patterns, my negotiation reflex. 3 tools. The first one excavates the sentences. The second traces them to their source. The third rewrites them, not with affirmations, but with sentences your adult mind authors deliberately. Because you can't rewrite code you can't see. And right now, the code is running in a voice that isn't yours. Here's the thing that's been messing with your confidence for years. You know what to do with money. You've read the books. You understand compound interest. You could give a decent 10-minute talk on why lifestyle inflation is dangerous. And you still do the same thing, in the same category, with the same triggers, around the same types of people. The overspending isn't random. It's patterned. And you've been calling it a discipline problem because that's the only explanation the financial advice world offers. You know better. You just need more willpower. Wrong layer. Your brain makes money decisions in 2 layers. The knowledge layer, conscious, rational, slow, that's where your financial education lives. It processes, weighs options, produces recommendations. Save this. Don't buy that. Negotiate the salary. The firmware layer runs underneath. The inherited sentences, phrases absorbed from parents, family, environment before you were 12. Not stored as opinions, stored as operating instructions, pre-conscious and fast, It fires in the 200 to 400 milliseconds before the knowledge layer wakes up, which means by the time your educated brain says, "I should save this $200, the firmware has already said, "But your father told you people who save too much are afraid of living." And the emotional charge of a sentence absorbed at age 7 is infinitely heavier than a paragraph you read in a book at 28. You can feel it if you know what to feel for. A contraction in the upper abdomen just below the sternum, lasting less than a second. You feel it when the check arrives, when someone mentions salary. That tightening is the sentence executing in your body before it becomes language in your mind. By the time the knowledge layer shows up, your wallet is already out. Firmware operates in the body first, the mind second. This is why every budgeting app works for 3 weeks and then fails. The app talks to the knowledge layer. The behavior runs on firmware, and firmware fires faster, carries more emotional weight, and has been running longer than any financial knowledge you've picked up since. You can't override firmware with knowledge. You have to go below, hear the sentence, trace it, and rewrite it. The sentences aren't hidden. They're fast. They fire and execute before you notice. The way you don't hear the starter motor in a car because the engine drowns it out within a second, but the starter motor is there, every time. And if you turned the key and paused, held the ignition without letting the engine catch, you'd hear it clearly. Sentence archaeology works the same way. Enter the financial situation where your pattern activates, and instead of letting the decision execute, pause. 3 seconds. The firmware fires, but the action doesn't follow, and the sentence becomes audible. A phrase, a voice, words you didn't choose to think. First, identify your pattern trigger. Not your general financial weakness, the specific situation. Not, "I overspend." I overspend when I'm at a restaurant with friends and the check arrives. Not, "I can't save." I can't save when I've had a rough week and I pass the store I always stop at. The pattern is situational. Name the situation. That's where the sentence lives. Then enter the trigger deliberately. When you reach the decision point, pause. Don't reach for the wallet. Don't say, "I got it." Don't click buy. 3 seconds. Hold the ignition without letting the engine catch. Now, Ken, listen. Pay attention to what fires first. There will be a sentence, preformed, with a tone, sometimes in a voice that isn't yours. You can't let them see you can't afford it. Good people don't argue about money. If you save too much, you'll miss out on life. Whatever it is, write it down, word for word, exactly as it fired. That's the firmware. You just heard the starter motor. If this is making sense, hit the like button. It helps me understand what kind of content actually lands with you, and it takes less than a second. Repeat for your top 3 financial patterns. Each one has its own sentence, its own voice. Write all 3 on the same page. When you see them together, you'll understand why the budget app never worked. It was trying to override sentences it couldn't hear. And notice, the sentences are old, slightly formal, out of step with how you actually talk, because a child stored them in the syntax of the speaker. One person's response to one situation, spoken once, absorbed permanently, never updated. Now trace the sentence. Not to blame the speaker, they were almost certainly someone who loved you, doing their best. You trace it because the installation mechanism is what gives the sentence its power, and understanding the mechanism dissolves that power. Sentences embed as firmware under 3 simultaneous conditions. The speaker is an attachment figure. The emotional intensity is high. Stress, fear, shame, anger, and the child's evaluative capacity is low. Under 12, the brain can't tell the difference between my parents' opinion and how reality works. That's why a sentence spoken once by your mother, under financial stress, in a moment of wounded pride, embedded with more permanence than 10 years of financial education under calm conditions. 3 tracing questions. Who is speaking? Replay the sentence. Not the words, the voice. Whose voice is it? A parent, a grandparent, a teacher. They're not a financial expert. They're a person with their own inherited sentences, their own unexamined firmware, passed to you the way a gene passes, automatically, without intention. Where and when was it spoken? There's a scene. For me, a kitchen counter at 8:45 in the evening. For you, it might be a car ride after a family argument. A grocery store where a parent put something back and said, "We can't afford that," with the tone you encoded as a permanent identity statement. Trace the scene. Seeing it as a specific moment, not a universal truth, is the beginning of the sentence losing its authority. And what was the speaker feeling? This dissolves the firmware's power. My mother wasn't delivering a universal principle about dignity. She was a woman embarrassed by a bill split she couldn't comfortably afford, driving home in the dark with her pride wounded and her child in the back seat. She said the thing her own mother's sentences told her to say. She wasn't legislating. She was hurting. And I absorbed her hurt as my operating system. When you complete the audit, the sentence stops being a law and becomes a person sentence. A law commands obedience. A stressed parent's kitchen counter declaration, seen in full context, commands compassion. For the parent who was hurting, for the child who absorbed the code, and for the adult who's been running it for decades without knowing it had an expiration date it was never given. Every money mindset program ends the same way. Say, "I am abundant." Write affirmations. Visualize wealth. And it fails, because affirmations target the knowledge layer while the firmware keeps running underneath. Saying, "I am abundant," while the firmware runs "people like us don't get to have nice things," is like painting over a cracked foundation. The surface looks different. The crack is still there. The rewrite protocol replaces the firmware at the same depth in the same execution window. Write the inherited sentence and its behavioral output. When this situation happens, this sentence fires, and I do this behavior. For me, when the check arrives, people who let others pay don't have dignity fires, and I grab it regardless of my financial situation. Then author the replacement from your own adult experience. Not a book, not a quote. Something true tested against your actual financial life. Here's where I got mine. I went through 6 years of bank statements. Every restaurant, bar, cafe charge higher than a single meal. 6 years. $14,217. I could trace the sentence executing line by line. March 2019. $94 at a Thai restaurant. 4 friends. I grabbed the check before it landed. Nobody asked me to. The sentence fired and my hand moved. August 2020. $112 at a rooftop bar. A birthday for someone I barely knew. But the check came, and the sentence said pay, and I paid. $14,217 invested over 6 years at average market returns. Roughly $19,400. The emergency fund I'd never built, which caused 6 years of financial anxiety, which made me feel undignified in exactly the way the sentence was supposedly protecting me from. The sentence designed to protect my dignity had destroyed my financial dignity. That irony gave the replacement its weight. My replacement: dignity isn't measured by who pays. Dignity is measured by whether I can cover rent without anxiety on the first of the month. And every check I grab to perform generosity is a withdrawal from the account that actually protects my dignity. Oh, that didn't come from a book. It came from a spreadsheet at 2 a.m. Installation. The next 5 times you hit the trigger, pause at the decision point. Hear the inherited sentence fire. Immediately follow it with the replacement, in your own voice, with your own experience behind it. 5 repetitions. The firmware layer learns through emotional repetition at the moment of activation, the same mechanism that installed the original. By repetition 5, the replacement starts firing first. Not more discipline. A firmware patch. Think about an accent. You have one. You can't hear it. You speak thousands of words every day and cannot detect the rises, falls, vowel shapes that anyone who didn't grow up where you grew up identifies instantly. Your accent isn't a choice. It's an inheritance, absorbed from voices around you before you could read. You're inside it. Now imagine someone records you and plays it back. For the first time, you hear yourself the way others hear you. That vowel, that's regional. That rhythm, your father's cadence. You're not hearing your voice for the first time. You're hearing your inherited voice. Your financial sentences are your financial accent. The sentence archaeology is the recording played back. The source code audit traces which parts came from which voices. And the rewrite protocol is the moment you decide. The parts that are costing me. Those I can retrain. Not erase. Retrain. In my own voice. Chosen, not inherited. I'm not going to give you a budget template or tell you to automate your savings. You've heard all of that. The knowledge layer was never the problem. The problem is one sentence, maybe two, maybe three. Running below your knowledge, in a voice you haven't heard since you were a child. Name the specific trigger, the one behavior your knowledge disagrees with. And the next time that situation arrives, pause. 3 seconds. Hold the ignition. Listen for the sentence, right now. Before you close this video, my primary financial trigger is: be specific enough to describe the scene. Commit to one thing. Next time, you pause for 3 seconds. The sentence will be there. It's been making the decision for 15, 20, 25 years. You've never heard it because you've never paused long enough for the starter motor to become audible. Your mother, or your father, or whoever's voice is in that firmware, wasn't giving bad advice. They were giving the only advice their own firmware knew how to produce. Scared or proud or ashamed, they said the sentence their own parents said to them decades before you were born. Not because it was true, because it was inherited. And inherited things run until someone says, that sentence had a speaker. That speaker had a context. And the context expired 20 years ago. So I'm giving it an expiration date. Today. The conversation that changed how I see money wasn't about money. It was about hearing. Hearing for the first time in 22 years. The voice making my financial decisions before my conscious mind entered the room. My mother's voice in a kitchen when I was a child, saying one sentence about dignity that installed itself as firmware and ran every group dinner, every grabbed check, every performance of generosity that was actually a child's fear. She wasn't wrong. She was hurting. And her hurt became my code. My code became my behavior. My behavior became my financial identity. One I never authored. Running on a sentence I never chose, in a voice I never heard until a barber named Marcus on a slow Wednesday asked, "Why do you always pay?" I didn't have an answer. I had a sentence, and the sentence had an author who wasn't me. Your financial life has a sentence too. It's there, running, firing, deciding every time you reach for your wallet or feel a guilt about money you can't explain. 3-second pause, one sentence heard, one origin traced, one rewrite authored. That's a linguistic renovation, and the voice that runs your money after the renovation, for the first time in your entire financial life, will be yours. Don't tell me your budget. Tell me the sentence. We can't afford that. Money is the root of all problems. People like us don't get to have nice things. We always pay our way. Name the sentence. Name the voice. Name the room. Because the moment it stops being how I feel about money and becomes what my mother said in the kitchen in 2003, it loses the authority of truth, and one person's sentence heard clearly can be thanked, understood, and retired. Comment your sentence. I'll read everyone. Subscribe for more content that excavates the invisible linguistic layer underneath the decisions you think you're making consciously. Not to blame the speakers, but to hear the sentences and author the rewrites that finally make the voice in the decision your voice.